Hi guys, this is Erica from Gokce Capital.
Now before I begin, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and turn on notifications. In the 1680s, Jacques Marquette paddled through a series of wind-swept dunes accompanied by the smell of wild onion and garlic. The Chicago River, not yet forced to move backwards, sluggishly moved water from the surrounding plains to the lake, creating the series of marshy lowlands that Marquette was exploring. 150 years later, the native habitat and inhabitants were gone. In their place was the tiny town of Chicago. In the town's original plat, the lakefront is shown as a small strip of land, labeled common land to remain forever open, clear, and free of any buildings. But this was no recreational parkland. Through the force of erosion, the lake shortly stole the park from the new city. Worried about the homes constructed along Michigan Avenue, the road closest to the water, the city allowed the Illinois Central Railroad to build a line running parallel to the beach in exchange for the construction of a stone breakwall that would prevent further erosion. The waterfront was soon dominated by rail yards and, a few decades later, debris from the Chicago fire, for the lake and the Chicago River had always been a convenient dumping ground for the city. So great was the quantity of debris from this fire that the Chicago shoreline park space was restored, albeit one dominated by garbage, rail yards, and squatters' shacks. Yet the filled shoreline represented opportunity. Amid the grand plans for a new Chicago was a heated debate about the nature of the new waterfront, a debate that was in part dominated by two Chicago titans. And I'll cover their clash at the end of this video. But while not all waterfront land is as complicated and controversial as the Chicago lakefront, it does come with its own unique challenges. So if you are looking to buy your perfect parcel of waterfront property, in today's video, we'll cover the top things you should know before purchasing. Number 1. Inspect waterfront property carefully. Don't become so enamored with a particular vista that you forget to commission all the surveys and inspections that you will need to ensure that you are getting a property you can use as you would like. Take the time to commission a survey, elevation certificate if needed, water quality tests, wetlands delineation, again if needed, and bulkhead inspection, if applicable. Number 2. Waterfront property may be in a special hazard flood zone. This will mean primarily that it could be subject to regular flooding. This may also be the case even if you are not in a special hazard flood zone, and is perhaps one of the primary things to look out for when buying waterfront land. But if you are in a special hazard flood zone, and you plan to build, or you are purchasing a home, you will be required to purchase flood insurance if you need to take out a loan. And even if this isn't a requirement, it's a good idea, given the kind of damage that a major flood could produce. And finally, if you are going to build on a waterfront property, you may also need to elevate any buildings constructed. Number 3, waterfront property can come with unexpected costs. In certain circumstances, you may be able to buy a building along the waterfront, but will technically be leasing the land beneath it, which is owned by a state or other public entity. In this case, you will have to pay a lease fee, which can often be fairly high. The good thing here, though, is that the land lease is often in lieu of property taxes. But be sure to commission a title search to verify ownership of the land itself. As mentioned before, you may also need to purchase flood insurance as well as homeowners insurance if you are building on the property. And also keep in mind that premiums for homeowners insurance will likely be higher than on a property that is not located along the water. If there is a bulkhead along your property's shoreline, you may be responsible for maintaining it, and maintenance responsibilities for any bulkheads is something that you will want to research before purchasing. Many properties located along a waterfront are part of a community or HOA, so be sure to research any HOA fees prior to purchasing. And finally, if you do plan to build on a property, expect to pay extra to make buildings water or storm resistant. For example, if you are along the ocean, buildings will need to be constructed from materials that are resistant to salt and may also need storm-resistant construction, such as storm shutters. And as we mentioned previously, if you are in an area that experiences a fair amount of flooding, you should expect to have the building elevated or otherwise made flood-proof. Number 4. If you are buying property with an existing dock, check that the dock is properly permitted. Sometimes a prior owner will have built a dock without going through the proper permitting process, and this can create problems for you later on. So check that the dock is fully permitted. And while you're at it, make sure that you actually own the dock. There have been some circumstances where property buyers purchase waterfront property, believing that they own a dock that seems to be jutting off of their land, only to find that it is owned by the neighbor, or perhaps is owned by an HOA or public entity. Number 5. Verify that your property fully extends to the water's edge. In certain circumstances, you may find that there is a strip of land between you and the water. Often this strip of land will be publicly owned and was created to ensure public access to the waterfront, but sometimes it's privately owned. And if this is the case, this privately owned strip of land may actually prevent you from accessing the water. So check your deed's legal description, as well as any recorded plats of the property or the surrounding area, to ensure that you do have access to the water's edge. Number 6. Check if your property has an access easement on it. If you do own land that extends all the way to the water, you may find that at the time of subdivision, an access easement was created on the property that allows the public or the rest of the community to access the waterfront, which means you may purchase the property and then be surprised to find people walking through your land to reach the water. So complete a title search to check for any easements and understand if one exists and what your obligations are if it does. Number 7. Confirm that you can use the water in the way that you would like. Now it's important to note that the vast majority of the time, you will not own the water itself, or even much of the land beneath the water. Waterways are usually publicly held, although in some circumstances there may be privately owned lakes. But because you don't own the waterway itself, there may be restrictions on how the water can be used. For example, in some circumstances you may not be allowed to build out a dock or pier. You may also find that on smaller lakes or rivers, there are restrictions on the kinds of vehicles that can be used. These may include limitations on any motor vehicles or jet skis. There may also be restrictions on fishing and the removal of waterfront vegetation. So be sure to do your research and understand these sorts of restrictions. But let's return to the Chicago lakefront. In 1893, Montgomery Ward looked down from his office window on the rail yards and debris that filled Lake Park. But by this time, there was one new addition. The Art Institute of Chicago had recently been constructed as a welcoming hall for the World Expo. The Chicago planners had great plans for Lake Park, today called Grant Park, including a series of museums and civic buildings to be built on the newly reclaimed shoreline, the centerpiece of which was to be the Museum of Natural History. Funded by Ward's rival Marshall Field, the museum would be named for him and would include a front statue of Field as tribute. This last bit perhaps added insult to injury, for Ward already believed the lakefront should remain a public space, open and clear as the original plan stated. He backed up these claims in court by arguing that the original purchasers of properties along the lakefront had acquired an easement of light air and unobstructed view based on the original plat of the city. Thus began a decades-long struggle between public interest, in the form of the city's right to build civic buildings, and private rights fought in the name of another kind of public interest, parkland. Ward brought no less than 4 lawsuits against the city. The first was to remove the practice of garbage dumping in Grant Park, and the last was a suit to remove the Field Museum from the area. Ward, of course, was successful, and today we have him to thank for Chicago's beautiful lakefront. But the story is certainly a complicated one. It represents a triumph of a somewhat paternalistic defender of public interest against a public entity that was, to be fair, often corrupt and unreliable, but which still would have been, in most other circumstances, the primary developer of public works. And I do sometimes wonder, what if Ward had been defending his private right to further build up the area, or otherwise use the lakefront for his own profit? What then would have become of the Chicago waterfront? Either way, it represents the complicated intersection of interests that often accompanies waterfront land. Now, do you have any stories about waterfront property? Let us know in the comments. Did you like this video? You're going to love our Gokce Land Due Diligence program. We'll make you a land due diligence expert in just 7 days. Check it out at gokcecapital.com/glad. And while you're at our website, don't forget to explore our $1 down properties at gokcecapital.com/listings. Finally, don't hesitate to reach out with any questions. You can email, call, or text, and we will respond as soon as possible. So thank you for listening, and more to come.